Hello and welcome back to the Fight and Talk 2 conversation. This time it's the Fight and Talk 2 channel, but this time we're having a topical debate. Joined as always by the fantastic co-hosts of the show, Prath and George. How are we doing, lads? All good?
All good. Yeah, I'm all good, mate.
Good. We got one thumb.
Very nice.
Very nice. Very nice.
Very nice.
This week we are going to talk a little bit about one of our fallen soldiers here. We've lost Dan Hardy from BT Sport and obviously from commentating on the UFC events as well. And it's crazy because he's been in and around the UFC for such a long time. He's obviously been a fighter. I think he's a fantastic analyst. At some points he's very controversial as well with regards to his how he carries himself, especially with the Herb Dean incident last year when he was obviously getting quite rowdy and stuff like that. But he's always been a fantastic analyst and one of the most enthusiastic and passionate people on the sidelines, talking us through the fights and his knowledge of fighting as well. And we all watch his breakdowns before the fights and after the fights, etc. And he's just the passion just radiates from this guy, right? So, Prath, you're obviously into WWE and pro wrestling and stuff, and it was actually a pro wrestling guy that broke this news, but there's so much speculation about how it got there and what kind of happened. So just give us a little breakdown on that, man.
It was first reported by Dave Meltzer. Dave Meltzer is a notable kind of he's obviously a journalist within the pro wrestling community. He works for a company called the Wrestling Observer newsletter, and just really surprising that he is the one kind of reporting on this, because he's usually from the MMA side of things, he's usually a numbers guy, broadcast numbers, pay-per-view numbers, that kind of thing, more so than anything else. And he tends to do that side of reporting more so within the pro wrestling side of things. So very interesting to see him being the one to break that news. Not too sure how it kind of came across his desk as well. Obviously, he's got a very interesting source, and that's one of the things that Dan Hardy was tweeted about, is just kind of wanting to know what Dave Meltzer's source was, because I think it's definitely, it seems like, all of the news kind of came out today, and for him to know, it must be something that's definitely kept on the hush hush behind the scenes. There was nothing talked about it on the 259 fight night, on the post-fight press conference, in the pre-fight press conference. Usually when something like this happens, there's at least one, John Morgan, first guy to always ask the questions at the press conference. He's usually the one that's poking those really inquisitive questions. When Ariel Helwani got chucked out of UFC 199, Bisping versus Rockhold 2, John Morgan was the one to ask Dana White why Ariel and his crew was the ones that got removed. So it's definitely something that appears to be on the down low between the UFC and BT Sport. So just really, really interested to know how he ended up getting that newsletter.
It's crazy, and he's such a good analyst, and he's so his whole life is intertwined with the UFC and with fighting. He's obviously got his gym up north from us, which is obviously we're obviously based in London, and he's got his gym up north with Jimmy Warhead, and then he's got his breakdowns that he does himself. He's got his own channel, but doing so much work for BT Sport and for the UFC and different bits and pieces. But obviously being dropped from these promotions, he can go somewhere else. He started off in Cage Warriors. He can go back to doing Cage Warriors, but then is it going backwards? Are we going to see him on the Bellator scene as well? And will the accusations kind of match up with how many opportunities he gets after this? George, what do you think? Where do you see him going from here, and how do you think this dictates his career moving forward?
Well, it will depend on what has actually happened. That was what we're yet to know, what fully happened with the incident. When that comes out, this is why I feel like I have to be a little bit careful, because in this modern world that we live in, whatever inappropriate action that has obviously taken place, because clearly that's the case for the UFC and for BT to remove him permanently going forwards. It's Connor, you fucked me there, man. Why'd you do that again, man? Like, you've just put, it could be potatoes. That's completely thrown me.
Well, in the UFC, you can get kicked. You get kicked out, and then you get back in. The odd man.
We'll roll with it. Like, as soon as that popped up, like, that could be potatoes. I was just like, oh, mate, like, you just thrown me stuff.
But it could be. That's the thing. You know what? When we talk about the politics in the UFC and stuff like that, and obviously Otman Azatar got kicked out of his hotel room and got kicked off the fight card and everything for what he did. And then all of a sudden he's back in the UFC and he's back in the promotion because they found out that he had potatoes in his room because he wanted a Dauphinois. But Dan Hardy, obviously, with a break like this, it's not like the UFC can say, you know, this obviously must have been going on for a long time because you're innocent until proven guilty. So someone must have come forward. They must have complained to the HR department. We were speaking in our last week's episode about not really having a HR department in the UFC anyway, because people seem to be able to do whatever they want. Casey Kenny, when he said about Megan Anderson being a 4 a.m.er, there was no repercussions from that. So Dan Hardy literally must have said something either very, very offensive to this lady's gender or maybe the way she looks or something, or it's going to have to be something quite significant for him to be completely dropped. And then this is obviously going to be completely swept under the rug now. But where do you see him go from here, George?
Yeah, I suppose your shout of Cage Warriors is probably a good shout. That's potentially possible. I don't know. The interesting thing with things like that though is Cage Warriors is very closely linked to the UFC. Mm-hmm. You know, they're on the Fight Pass. It's very much intertwined, and it'll be interesting to see whether other promotions that are closely linked to the UFC, whether they are kind of almost forced to stamp their foot down and say, no, you can't have Dan Hardy. It could become quite difficult and awkward for him going forwards, potentially, depending on what has happened, depending on what has actually gone down. You are right about the UFC though, and they're kind of, I call it double standards for certain things. We don't know as well that this might have come from BT Sport and they've really pushed hard. That maybe it happened on the BT Sport kind of set or with the crew at in that department. We don't know. Maybe BT have pushed it hard. We don't it's hard to make a comment on it, but I presume this had happened at Fight Island in January, right? So they've had a bit of time now to kind of investigate it, understand what's happened. This is obviously all behind the scenes. That was in late January. It's now early March. It's been like 6 weeks now. It's been a decent amount of time. But I guess Cage Warriors makes sense. I guess pushing your own platform, which is it War Reptile, like the War Room, Full Reptile, sorry, that's it. Pushing that further potentially is an option. He was also talking about coming back and fighting in the UFC, which obviously seems to be dead in the water now. But yeah, I don't know where he goes from here because I think potentially the UFC is so big and so powerful they can make it quite awkward for him.
Yeah, definitely. Because Prath, obviously, he wanted to come back and fight your boy Matt Brown, didn't he?
And that was actually
we were seeing that.
That was one of the things I was going to just kind of mention there was that I think as a result of what's happened here, if you think about it from a timeline perspective, it has been a little bit of time since the Fight Island kind of went down. And so I would imagine that, you've seen quite a few crazy call outs, Nick Diaz, Matt Brown, Carlos Condit. I think he would fight any of those kind of guys. But does it make sense? Probably not. Do we want to see it? Probably not. I kind of want to see Dan Hardy. I think if Dan Hardy wants to have like a one last fight before on his way out, like fair enough. Match him up against whoever you want to. Definitely don't match him up against Diego Sanchez. Please leave Diego Sanchez alone, guys. We're done with that now. But yeah, no, I got to agree. I don't know if this throws a wrench into that plan as well to be able to take a fight as well. Does that mean that he gets pushed over to a different organization to take that fight? Who takes him in? Is that a Bellator kind of thing? Bellator at 170 have got quite, an interesting bag of guys at 170, but I don't think they've got anyone like, veteran-ish at 170 that they could really match him up against unless they just, decide to do what Bellator always do and chuck him in against a 21-year-old who's going to be a killer, which I hope they don't. And then I would say that if he does end up going via a fight route to a Bellator or a PFL or a One or wherever it is, that he could kind of seamlessly transition into their broadcasting team of some sorts. So I think maybe one comes with two, you know what I mean? He's able to get the fight, whether it be in Bellator, PFL, wherever, and then seamlessly transition into that broadcasting position.
Mm-hmm.
Prath's shout of Bellator is actually a really good one. Bellator have just signed a deal with the BBC iPlayer. The BBC are talking about setting up a proper group of people. If he is out of the UFC permanently, then potentially, I suppose, commentary analysts for Bellator on the BBC iPlayer, maybe having a fight in Bellator, maybe, who knows. But definitely the BBC might look at it potentially as an option for their show on the iPlayer.
Dan Hardy was doing some of the commentary for the BBC just radio for these fights. So like, I think on the numbered pay-per-views, he was providing just radio commentary for BBC Radio. So that might actually be a pretty seamless transition there.
Completely. But then does it tarnish his reputation in the fight game as well, you know, with regards to the fans? Until we really get the full insider scoop about this, it's so difficult to put any sort of opinion on it, especially with his kind of not cryptic tweets, but what he was saying was like an opportunity missed and something else. So it's like, what does that really mean? Has someone come to him with an opportunity? He's kind of told him to do one almost. And then it's just very strange that this all went down, and obviously calling people out up until the point of last week. Whereas if this was to happen, if the altercation was to take place in January, at the end of January, why is he even calling fighters out if he knows he's been suspended for the UFC almost? Or, you know, maybe, I just don't know. I really don't know how it works. I really don't know. But Bellator, obviously with the BBC, sounds like a great idea.
I suppose the biggest thing is like it will have to be a wait to know what actually happened. And if it turns out that he has done something which is deserving of being fired, then he should absolutely be called out on it. And he should be hung out to dry for it, because it's not acceptable in the model in today's society, but if it turns out that perhaps it was just a disagreement over something and it's got a bit heavy and it got a bit out of hand, then, maybe he might find a way back, but it's kind of a guessing game until like the full sort of evidence of stuff comes out. But as we all know, the UFC do keep cards tight to their chest. So whether this actually fully ever comes out is questionable, to be honest.
And who the other person was in the altercation as well? Was it Megan Levy? Was it Sanko? Who was it? Was it,
Was it Caroline Pierce? Was it Caroline Pierce who works for BT? There's loads of questions who it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. Prath, so what do you think about it being coming from this wrestling guy? And how do you think they get their sources and stuff like that? Because, I don't know, does the person that has this information just go, oh, who am I going to give it to today? Oh, it goes to you. You're welcome. How does that kind of thing work, man?
Yeah, he must have a source that has direct knowledge of what's going on there. I would say that, no one's ever going to reveal their sources. That's one of the things that kind of makes these journalists kind of sit behind a slightly impervious wall, if you will. Ariel's, if you think about all of the real top reporters, they've obviously got someone on the inside that is in a very high-ranking position, whether that's Hunter Campbell, the legal representation of the UFC, or, an Ari Emanuel or a Patrick Whitesell. I don't know who it is that he's got that link with. If I look at someone like Brett Okamoto, I would say that his source is definitely Dana White, right? Dana White and Brett have a great relationship. Mm-hmm. And I think Dana probably feeds information to Brett, and then allows him on like kind of like a time release to release some of that information as it goes along, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time, if they want to give out a piece of information, they'll say, off the record, on the record. And I'm sure Dana White has told Brett Okamoto a lot of stuff off the record, and maybe he's reported bits and pieces of it, but never maybe the full story. Mm. And so I believe that's maybe the same thing with Dave here. I think maybe he has got a very high-ranking member of the UFC as his kind of point of reference. Maybe they told him off the record and he wanted to publish the story, but without the name, how he got the permission to do that kind of thing. Because at the end of the day, I think like that is what kind of allows them to maintain those relationships with those sources, right? Is it anonymity for them? Yeah, anonymity for them to be able to give these stories, but also do it in a way that kind of allows them to keep their position within the company, right? Mm-hmm. And, whoever it was, they must be high. And, you know, it could be someone in the UFC. It could be someone in BT Sport as well. Maybe he's got a source within BT Sport that is giving the information to them. You know, it'd be coy for us to believe it's just the UFC who have either made this decision by themselves and just fired him straight up. And then BT Sport kind of followed suit. I would imagine that the UFC and the BT were working together to essentially, you know, say to Dan Hardy that they don't want him working for them anymore. But yeah, that's kind of how I would think it would come across his desk, but it's very difficult to say because again, it's that was one of the more shocking. I wouldn't say shocking. It was not, you know, it didn't blow me away, but like I was surprised that it was Dave Meltzer was the one that was the source for this.
Yeah. It's very strange. It's very strange, and obviously, as soon as these things unfold, we will be doing some videos about them. We're going to try and keep the content as hot as possible and give our 2 cents on it, you know. Until next time, thank you very much for joining into the Fight and Talk 2 channel. Hit like, hit subscribe, share it with your friends, brothers, cousins, mothers, auntie. And thank you very much to the fantastic co-hosts of the show, Prath and George. We'll see you next time.